So I was perusing Reddit this morning, and there's a really interesting article that was in the popular category, and it was talking about one of the common things I've seen recently, which is people talking about AI not being as useful as we all say it's going to be. And in this particular case, it looks like it was a survey done of like 6,000 CEOs, and the idea was they're just not seeing the productivity gains that were promised. At the same time, you may have also seen talk, and Andrew Yang, I think, had a really popular mention for this, talking about how he believes there's going to be an apocalypse in white-collar jobs, and it's going to happen within the next 12 to 18 months. And so the question is, which is true? Is AI going to be this huge agent of change in the workplace, or is it not going to be anything at all? And the answer is yes. But before I get into why I think that's the case, that both of these are actually true right now, I do want to talk about a real quick topic which was near and dear to my heart over a decade ago now, which was the idea of bullshit jobs. So if you don't remember this, what the idea of bullshit jobs was an essay written by David Graeber back in like 2013, which was later turned into a book and just sort of like a phenom. It is basically the idea that a lot of the white collar work that we've been doing over the last like 20 years is effectively meaningless. And the tragedy of it all was that the people doing this work knew it. And so put a pin in that just for a second. But first, let's talk about the actual computing part of this. So the reason why both things can be true is that we're at the early part of the impact curve. And that means that some people are already starting to be affected, and there's a bunch of people that aren't being effective. But this curve is definitely going to be uneven. And to understand this, I think it's really important then to understand the history of modern computing. Early on, the bottleneck with computing was literally compute. So even though when computers first came out, they were obviously better at doing things like math, repeatable math, much faster than humans, they still didn't have quite enough power to do all the things that we wanted to do. So think 3D graphics, advanced gaming, 4K video, right? All that crazy stuff. And so we got into this arms race where we started to build faster computers, and then we asked them to do more complex things. And then we ran out of power for that, and we just sort of like chased our tails for a while. But at the heart of all of this was the idea of brute force compute. And there's a really important subtext to this, which is that throughout all of these advances, humans had to spell out the instruction set and the way that these tasks got accomplished. So even though a computer could look really smart doing something, to make the computer do that, a human had to sit down and come up with an algorithm and create a product and publish that product and make it available to you so that you as a user could use that power. And that meant that even smart behavior, as we would describe it, was still an algorithm and a human that created that at some point in the chain. And this creates sort of like a weird tension, which is that even though, especially today, we have ungodly amounts of compute power, in order to extract that, we had to use the same pattern that we've had for the last 40 years now. A human would write a program, and then a computer would exploit the algorithms to perform some type of action. And so power isn't the bottleneck for modern computing in most tasks. It's the instructions that we give it. And that's where we have a bit of an inversion slash a total inversion with AI, is that AI completely changes this paradigm. Instead of humans designing a very specific mechanism to accomplish some task, AI ingests a massive corpus of data, and then it uses its own patterns to problem solve to come up with a solution for that problem. And the big difference is, even though to the computer we're still just processing zeros and ones, the instructions that the computer uses to get to that aren't handcrafted instructions anymore. And that's a huge, huge change. And so that gets us to the idea of like, why haven't CEOs seen big productivity gains? And the reason why we haven't seen that yet is because there needs to be at least two things true for those gains to happen. The models need to be good enough for real work. The models have been getting much, much better lately. And perhaps more importantly, for a lot of jobs aside from coding, there has to be a low friction way to plug that tooling, the AI, into the existing workflows. And until recently, that combo just simply didn't exist at scale. So I think a lot of people, and myself, I was in this group just till a couple months ago, would say that the AI revolution happened back in like 2020 when ChatGPT was released. And yeah, it's been that long. But I'd actually argue that when we look back at the history of this, the real revolution, we're going to define it as the end of 2025. There's two main reasons for that. The first is the models, again, are getting much, much better. And the second reason is going to be agentic. So the term you may have heard before, but the best way I've heard it described is AI with hands. So the idea being, previous to this, when you used an AI to perform some task, it was limited to the little box that the agent was actually in. And you do some useful things like that, but with agentic AI, the idea is it can now go and leave the little box that the chat agent is running in, and it can do things on your computer. So it can do things locally, like look at your file system, read files, create files, etc. But as capabilities grow, that's also going to mean that the AI can do things on your behalf, like book flights or check prices on a website. It is AI with hands, meaning to say that it can go do things that you would have normally had to done yourself. And that is a huge, huge difference. So basically, when CEOs say they didn't see a lot of gains, I believe them. But that's because the surveys were taken before these two big advances, before the models are getting much, much better, and before the real true rise of agentic AI. And this gets us back to the point of bullshit jobs. So computers are supposed to make us more efficient, but it turns out all they did was create a lot more overhead for us. And the reason why we didn't see all the productivity gains that we expected was because we didn't have the ability to compress the chain down, nor were there enough developers to create a solution for every small task that was created by all these new automations. And so before the AI revolution, to solve a problem meant this long chain of thinking about a problem, defining the problem set, writing some software, publishing that software, delivering that software, or if you're a business analyst, thinking of the problem, researching that problem, right? This whole big sequence of events had to happen in order for you to solve the problem. What's gonna happen is we're gonna expose a huge number of parts in that chain for what they actually were, which is just coordination theater. And that's why I think both parts of this chain can be true. AI is going to be ruthlessly good at finding efficiencies in the chain, creating more work, but it's also going to remove a lot of that middle layers within the chain that we used to have a lot of humans in the process for. It's a beautiful time, but also it's a very worrisome time for how this all plays out. So that is why both things can be true at once.